Part 2, students, for tutorial 4. We ended up with the changes in demand, the changes in supply, and what the impact on equilibrium would be. And then I quickly checked, could you read an actual graph if you were given all the information on it? And now what we want to do is go in and check what happens if there's a simultaneous change, and then what happens if government intervenes. All right, now let's take a careful, slow start looking at simultaneous changes. This can be complex for many students, and it does require you to understand all the previous explanations really well. So what would happen if demand increases or decreases? What would happen if supply increases or decreases? Then what we've got to do is we've got to actually work out if they both shift together, what is the magnitude of these changes? In other words, do they both shift by the same amount? In other words, demand changes by the same amount as supply? Or is the change in demand greater than the change in supply, or the change in supply greater than the change in demand? Now, this would all make sense if you were looking at your own product. For example, if you were looking at factors that would affect your supply and factors that would have affected your demand, you're going to have to consider all of those and then try and work out what will the impact be on my equilibrium price and what will the impact be on my equilibrium quantity. Now, in order to do this, you're going to usually have to draw at least 2 or 3 graphs. On occasion, they have asked in a question that you draw all 3 graphs, and I'm going to explain to you in a moment or two why that would happen. But the minimum you're probably going to be able to get away with is drawing 2 graphs, because you've got to work out which of these outcomes, that is, the change in price or the change in quantity, which one will be certain and which one will be uncertain. Now, for example, you'd start off with something like this. And I'm going to say to you, just for now, let's just pretend that we're going to go and say, all right, what we want to do is we want demand to go up. So demand is going to increase. And we're going to say at the same time, we discover that our factors that affect supply have caused supply to decrease. Now you know the rules. An increase in demand means that I'm going to shift my demand curve to the right. So there I go, and I shift my demand curve to the right. But that's not yet my new equilibrium position, because I've got a simultaneous change. So let's just change our color quickly, and let's go and say, let's go and take a red. Supply is decreasing, so I'm going to have to shift my supply curve to the left. So there goes my supply curve to the left. Now my new equilibrium position is going to be at that intersection of those 2 new curves. And now if you look at the graph that I've drawn here, we see that in fact my equilibrium quantity has remained the same, but I can definitely see that my equilibrium price has increased. Now this has shown me that the potential here is that quantity could be uncertain. Price will definitely increase. No matter how many of these graphs I draw, the price will definitely increase, but the impact on the quantity is going to be uncertain. Let me show you quickly on this side. So I'm going to do the same changes again. I'm going to show a shift in demand to the right. Let me just get my colors back. So my demand curve is going to shift to the right, as it did before, much the same as it did before. But now what I'm going to do is when I change supply, I'm going to change supply by less. So let's go in, and I'm going to make my shift in supply very small. So the impact on my supply curve was much less than the impact on my demand curve. And I go in and I say, all right, so let's go and see where is our new equilibrium. There it is. No argument. We are certain about what will happen to the price. It will definitely still go up. But notice now what happens to my quantity demanded, or my equilibrium quantity. My equilibrium quantity has increased. So the outcome or the impact on equilibrium quantity is uncertain. So there's one more that we're going to have a look at, ladies and gents. Let's take a look. We have on this graph, I've already done this example for you. Here we've done demand decreases while supply increases. And I've done one where the magnitude is the same. In other words, I've shifted my demand curve and my supply curve by the same amounts. And we can see price will go down. But once again, we can identify that quantity, the impact on quantity is going to be uncertain because my quantity has stayed the same. So I go in and I check, all right, what happens if I shift demand by a whole lot and supply by only a little? I can see here my price will still go down, but my quantity, equilibrium quantity, will decrease. So we've got three possible outcomes. Equilibrium quantity will remain the same, equilibrium quantity will decrease, and if I drew another graph where I showed that the shift in the demand curve was less than the shift in the supply curve, we would find that the equilibrium quantity would increase. Three possible outcomes. Ladies and gents, you have to be able to deal with this. Very possible that you will get questioned on it, all right? So once again, if you don't understand it, make sure you speak to someone about it. It's easy once you've got it, but it can seem quite intimidating until you've actually understood what's going on. All right, so that's done with changing demand and supply. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at what happens when government intervenes in the market. And government can now set certain limitations with regard to the prices of products in a market. So here we begin. When you are studying this, please make sure that you pay a lot of attention to the theory. I'm not, as is the norm in these tutorials, I'm not looking so much at the theory because you can read that in the textbook and you can study it. But make sure that you pay attention to the reasons why government would want to intervene in the case of a maximum price, the consequences of it, and then what government could potentially do as a result of those consequences. All right, I'm going to focus on what actually happens in the market. So we start off here with looking first at the bit of the theory on the side there, which says government can use price controls or a maximum price to assist consumers. Let's pretend this is the market for bread and the equilibrium price at the moment is at P, and consumers believe that this is too high for them. They cannot cope with this high price and they appeal to government to please assist them. So what government would do is put in a maximum price which is below the equilibrium. So if that price was 20 Rand, let's say government would put in a price of 15 Rand. They would say that is the only price that we are entitled to sell bread at. We can go lower than that, but we cannot go any higher than that. So that becomes P max. And of course, what is the consequence here? If you've learned how to read your graph correctly, you will see that the quantity demanded will immediately increase, while the quantity supplied will decrease. Consumers are happy, suppliers are not. And so what we end up here with is something that you're already aware of. We end up with excess demand and a shortage in our market. And of course, that is going to cause problems because now how do consumers get this product when there is a shortage of supply? Once again, at this point, you would take a look at the theory and go in and understand what are the consequences of this situation arising in the market. What is also important here is to understand that there is now no longer an equilibrium position. This has created disequilibrium in the market. The market forces are unable to correct the situation. Under normal circumstances, market forces would force the price up to equilibrium. They cannot operate it because this is law. The law has said this is the price, and you need to be able to explain this, all right? Once again, and urging you to make sure that this makes sense to you as you go. If it doesn't, talk to someone sooner rather than later. Looking at that little graph that I looked at the end of part one, once again, we can go to a graph like this and we can now implement a maximum price. Remember, your P max has to be below your equilibrium position. So there we see our P max is at a price of 4 Rand. And now we would see very easily that we get excess demand again if we're looking at it in terms of D O, that would be our excess demand. If we're looking at it in terms of D1, it would go all the way there. So 100 to 60, you can see our excess demand, our shortage, would be considerably larger. Once again, market forces cannot operate. There is no equilibrium position, and this is going to cause problems in the market. Ladies and gents, you have to be able to do exactly the same with a minimum price. What happens when government introduces a minimum price to assist producers? So government is going to now set a price that is higher than the equilibrium price because producers are saying this price is too low, we can't survive. So government comes in, they set a PMIN, minimum price, but now of course we have the problem. Quantity supplied is increasing, but quantity demanded is decreasing. And of course this is going to give rise to a surplus in the market, and now again we have to consider what do we do about that surplus. How is government going to deal with it? Once again, I refer you now to the theory, which is something that you can go in and read and study for yourself once you understand the consequences. Once again, this creates a disequilibrium in our market. Market forces are unable to correct the situation, and this is because, once again, this is legislated and we can't break the law. Normally, market forces would have forced that price down back to equilibrium, but that can't happen. Now, ladies and gents, of this learning unit or this tutorial stops here, but the last part of the learning unit requires you to understand your welfare costs. Now, this is a complex concept for most students. You will struggle to understand this unless you have dealt with all of those issues that I have already pointed out to you and dealt with in our tutorial. Good luck with that. Please remember, talk to your lecturers and take another look at any of these slides if you are struggling with this. Goodbye till next time.